This video is called Atheism Has Evil Moral Consequences? Question mark. Let's take a look-see.
Welcome back, everyone, to Bridge the Divide, where we examine irrational beliefs, the irrational behaviors that often follow, and how with education, rationality, and reason we can bridge the societal divides that they create. Today, we're taking a look at a video from the channel.
Even that statement, we're off to a terrible start, J.L. Warren. Why bridge any divide? I don't understand. What's this concept? You're going to bridge the divide? Why? You're going to bridge the divide? By the way, every freeze frame works with this guy. Why are we bridging a divide? I don't understand. What's this purpose? Can I not bridge the divide? Can I maintain a very narrow, I don't know, quote, bigoted view, JL? Is that possible? Why not that? Actually, why not kill off the other side from an atheist view? I don't understand. Why not?
Channel Sanctus, where the host, who is most definitely a Catholic, claims to be able to make the case that the position of atheism entails evil moral consequences. And now that our eyeballs have rolled back to their normal positions in our skulls, let's hear what he has to say.
When we look out into the modern world, we see a smorgasbord of conflicting moral systems. The leaders of nations cannot agree on what is the good, or essentially, what should everyone strive for.
This sentiment is actually something that I agree on, but I also recognize that it's a social circumstance entailed by the fact that moral distinctions are themselves subjective in nature. Per the philosophical razor Hume's guillotine, an ought cannot be derived from an is, meaning that one cannot logically conclude a moral statement, what one ought do, from purely factual statements, that which is. What connects these two concepts, the facts, to the moral conclusions within societies are ethical premises, those statements being about what is valuable or desirable. And for the most part, one of the founding features of societies are collective agreements upon what is valuable and desirable. Examples being human well-being and human flourishing. And
wait, those aren't the only examples, buddy. Some examples include offing a whole sect of people that are in the way of your wants and desires, right? Notice how they always go to, well-being, let's work together, cooperation.
yes, as
Diversity.
our societies grow larger over time, encompassing more voices, more opinions, and more complex social interactions, trying to determine the most moral course of action in any potential given situation can become extremely difficult. But
He just already contradicted himself. Calling an action moral, he already violated Hume's guillotine. He's already in a contradiction. Oh, it can be no, it's impossible from your view. What do you mean it's difficult? Figuring out what the moral action should be is just very difficult sometimes. I'm a real thinker.
But that doesn't entail that doing so is impossible. It just requires the collective agreement within the society to do any and all necessary work to accomplish it.
But what is the source of this division? Well, put simply, the source is that of atheism or secularism.
No, it's the fact that moral realism is not a thing that exists. And so moral subjectivism or moral relativism leaves us with the daunting social challenge of finding common ground that every single person can agree upon. The capacity of an individual to make what we call moral distinctions has nothing to do with whether or not they believe in the existence of a God. Your problem, Sanctus, is with the fact that there are other...
Wrong. He's already in a contradiction. If people simply agreed that God exists, and they derive their moral system from the belief, even if it was a false belief, but they agreed that God exists, they all believed it. You didn't know if it was true or false. I don't understand. What's the problem, dude?
People who don't believe as you do, and they can make moral distinctions that you personally don't agree with. And as hard as it may be for you to hear this, that you happen to have been convinced that a particular version of a God exists does not entail that you corner the market on morality.
Atheism is...
No, you could actually. If you were convinced a particular God exists, you can corner the market on morality by merely using force. What's the contradiction? There is no contradiction. What do you mean? If you're saying there's no real moral facts, then whatever it is you're calling moral is merely a set of preferences that a bunch of people agree with. And the people who agree, if they have better guns and more will than you, they get to dictate morality. They literally have a monopoly. They actually, in reality, have cornered the market on what's called moral.
Is the denial or lack of belief in the existence of God.
Well, at least you got that part right. Now let's see if you also understand that that position is only concerned with that one single proposition. And
no, it's not. Look at every freeze frame works with this guy. No, it's not. The conclusion or the position that God doesn't exist is not a position that exists or comes from a vacuum, right? It's derivative of another set of propositions about the world. You don't come to God doesn't exist without assuming a whole slew of metaphysical assumptions, epistemic assumptions, some type of criteria for how you come to what you call true knowledge or positions at all. Of course, it assumes a bunch of other propositions. Where do you think it comes from? Do you think that your position on atheism, on theism, on God in general, just kind of like you were endowed? Like, did it fall off like some sort of tree? Did it float into your head? Like, what are you saying? Of course, it entails a bunch of other positions.
It is pretty much understood within the realm of philosophy that there is no real way to rationally justify that claim. But it should also be understood that philosophical concepts such as the Euthyphro dilemma expose the reality that if you
the Euthyphro dilemma
choose to define
so low tier, dude,
your God as being ultimate, meaning that nothing exists external of the God to act as a point of reference or a point of appeal for logical coherency or even its own mental content, then it's entailed that any moral distinctions it makes are entirely subjective, meaning that
unbelievable. Just this is like a classic category error, of course. I'm tired of even saying category error at this point. No, he's referring to God as this entity that comes to conclusions by input, analysis, predication, evaluation, as if God is exactly the mind that we understand. By the way, J.L. Warren and company, they can't even tell you what a mind is. So as they do this critique by transposing the human temporal methods for coming to beliefs, making propositions about the world, being a subject in the world, subject to the world, evaluating the world, talking about the world in time, space, matter, temporally. He transposes that experience, that view onto God, which is categorically incorrect. So you're no longer doing an internal critique. But even so, he doesn't even have the justification to do that here with each other, with us, like to assume you have a mind. If you ask these people what a mind is, you reveal that they are in fact materialists, physicalists, naturalists. Like they grant themselves some nebulous thing, and they'll say things like emergent property, which, by the way, if you get into emergentism as a philosophy, emergentism debunks this idea that you could have a universal thing called a mind, called reasoning, which all humans share some variation of, because emergentism is about something novel coming forth in some sort of phenomenal effect, epiphenomenal effect. Reasoning, no, you couldn't trust your reasoning if it was an emergent property, which that's all they have. Is like they're like, well, my mind is what my mind does. It gives me stuff. It makes me think of things. You can't tell me what it is.
They are entirely dependent upon its own mind and stances. So yes, by the light...
Say stances. Like, he's calling God an it, and he's saying God has a stance the same way we would have a stance temporally. Just completely categorically flawed.
of your own worldview, moral relativism is confirmed. And just because in your worldview you've defined your God as being the big Billy badass of the universe, it doesn't entail that the moral distinctions it makes are suddenly mind stance independent.
And adopt a view of morality.
Well, that would apply to truth too, dummy. So if he's going to try to do this defeater and reduce things to relativism from the moral position, notice how he grants himself a system that he can't defend, right? He doesn't talk about it. But notice how as he's talking, he's assuming that he has access to something called objective truth, that truth is absolute, universal, apprehendable, discoverable, right? He assumes this. That's why he's doing a video, right? I mean, aren't we all under the assumption we're discovering things? Well, the problem with JL and company, and by company I mean all atheists, is that they talk about morality and they reduce it to relativism. But the same methodology they use to reduce it to relativism would reduce their own conclusion about morality being relative to relativism. They try to get you to talk about morality, but morality and truth are linked. The way in which you're going to talk about morality, if it's real or not, from the atheist view is going to apply to truth itself. So don't let them wiggle out of the truth part. Don't let them talk about just morality, because talking about morality requires the assumption that you're talking about truth, the truth about morality. But J.L. Warren and all of his pseuds grant themselves this mechanical device, this process called, we can talk about truth. We're going to talk about the truth of the matter, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to say it like it's true. We're going to talk about philosophy, and we're going to talk about different schools of thought, and we're going to talk about different theistic views, and we're going to be very rigorous in our talking about it. It's like, dude, you already, by your own standard, you already defeated your own position, because your own utterances in this stupid video, your own utterances, according to your own system, are reduced to relativistic. You can't even know those are true.
Morality that is subjective. Subjective morality can be defined as a system of morality that is based on the subject or the individual and his preferences, feelings, culture, etc.
The encompassing term for this is moral anti-realism, which is the meta-ethical position that mind stance independent facts and values don't exist, and as such, moral judgments are neither true nor false in this.
Swap moral with true. True statements, false statements. So good and evil, good, evil. Statements about reality. Swap this with truth. The important conclusion from this is that all propositions are held as being inherently subjective. And truth judgments, truth evaluations, are applied by agents doing the evaluation. Apply that to the evaluation itself, right? All truth evaluations. He thinks he's getting somewhere. You're getting nowhere, JL. You have to admit from your own system that your own evaluations are not knowable and completely subjective. Ultravoid, $10. He says, I have an answer about the mind. I watched enough Solo Leveling. My mind arise from the shadow. Right, yeah, your mind is the shadow. The shadow is the mind. It's an effect from the atheist view. $10. The mind doesn't exist in the physical, but does in the metaphysical. Well, that's what he'll say, but he won't give you the ontology of it. He can't, right? He can't provide the ontology for the thing that's doing the evaluating, that's doing the knowing, that's doing the rejecting, right?
The same way that factual statements about reality are. The kicker here, and the one that theists cannot overcome by appealing to any kind of a God entity, is that there exists no logical contradiction in moral anti-realism being the case. So,
well, actually, there's a contradiction when you assume that we ought to, that there's any ought, moral ought, for ought, why we ought to avoid contradictions, or ought to come to coherent conclusions, or ought to deny God's existence if it's irrational, why we ought to pursue reasonable beliefs that are justified, right? Suddenly, there's this embedded imperative toward something called truth. Why else would you debate? So this is what's funny about these guys. Once you ask them, why are you debating then? They'll have to say it. They'll cope and say, well, it's fun. I have fun or whatever. There's no purpose to it. So why ought we abandon the belief in God? No reason, actually. No reason. Why ought you pursue your channel and trying to debunk theists? No reason at all. There's not a purpose to it. There's no reason why we should abandon false beliefs or come to coherent beliefs or avoid contradictions. There's no reason not to be a sophist. There's no reason why not just take a trivialist position on everything, which means that everything's equally true and false at the same time. But suddenly he has this air to him, right? All the atheists do. They have this charged passion. Bridge the divide. Why? What are you talking about? Bridge the divide? Why?
So any argument posed against it ultimately boils down to an appeal to emotion, specifically an appeal to consequences.
To give an example.
That would be the same for you guys. What are you talking about? You would just have an emotional preference or an effect even. It wouldn't even be a preference under your view. You'd be at the effect of mechanics, neurology, and chemistry. Whatever you thought was something you leaned toward as a view, you would just be at the effect of previous physical dominoes, leaning toward anti-theism, anti-moral realism, and the rest, right? It's all, by the way, these guys can't even give you the difference between an emotion and a proper evaluation, which is equally in the same category of physical phenomenon. An emotion, consequence of chemistry. An evaluation, consequence of chemistry. What's the categorical distinction between an emotion in this purely physical world, JL? By the way, I'm not expecting him to address any of this. I'm just doing it for you guys. But you could ask these people, what's the difference categorically between an emotion, an epiphenomenal physical effect of pure matter and biology, and an evaluation? Same exact thing, just a different part, right? Different area, different location, different coordinates maybe on the brain or whatever they would say. But there's no ontological difference such that we should appreciate the evaluation as something better than the emotion. Why should we treat a blade of grass growing with any differently than someone uttering something out of their mouth from a physicalist, naturalist view? Why? They can't tell you why. But they assume it in all their videos. It's underlying right there.
Those who hold to subjective morality may value sexual freedom, or they may not value it. It is dependent on the individual's preferences.
I noticed that you put up some stock imagery of an abortion rights rally at this point in the video, and I wanted to make sure that you knew that despite all of the hang-ups that Catholics tend to have about sex, the abortion access debate is really not so much about sexual freedom, because it's damn near universally about safeguarding the human right to bodily autonomy and
human right. By the way, this guy's such a moron. JL, you don't have bodily autonomy from your view, right? Not only do you not have bodily autonomy from your view, you couldn't even prove autonomy. 2, you don't have a reason why we should preserve bodily autonomy. 3, a right, excuse me, under your view, a right is just as fictional as an angel. Well, what's a right? What are you talking about, dude? That sounds like magical thinking. I thought you had a channel making fun of theists for believing in supernatural things that have no evidence, things that you can't hold or measure, things you can't point to, smell, taste, weigh. What happened? Care.
Opposing position in order to give your own position more credence, then your position never had any credence to begin with.
David.
A position is an epiphenomenal effect from your view. They have equal credence. They're effects of physics, dude. That's like saying your chemical reaction has no credence. It's like, that's what your chemical reaction is doing. And by your, I mean a chemical reaction, you. You're a walking chemical reaction. Imagine believing that we're all walking chemical reactions completely determined to utter whatever comes out of our mouth, no different than farting comes out of our butt. And then having the arrogance to be like, and your position has no credence. How does a gust of wind have credence? You know what I mean? How does a physical chemical reaction have credence?
Hume explains it best when he states, so that when you pronounce any action or character to be vicious, you mean nothing but that from the constitution of your nature you have a feeling or sentiment of blame from the contemplation of it. Vice and virtue, therefore, may be compared to sounds, colors, heat, and cold, which, according to modern philosophy, are not qualities in subjects, but perceptions in the mind.
Yes, I can hear you all right now. It is a dicey prospect when a theist tries to quote somebody. But fortunately, in this instance, I happen to be very familiar with this quote because it's taken directly from one of my favorite philosophical texts, specifically Scottish philosopher David Hume's philosophically legendary book, A Treatise of Human Nature.
Yeah, and if you read Hume, you would know that Hume is actually consistent with his view. He understands why his view reduces to something absurd. And you guys, appealing to your favorite philosophers, are not consistent. David Hume, consistent. You, not consistent.
Exactly what it is that grounds such things as facts without itself being a mind with its own stances.
He just denied that facts exist. So this is what's so frustrating. Their argument is against moral realism, which states that morality is grounded in some type of fact about the world, some statements about the world, some events that occurred or whatever. It's identical, one-to-one. And yet, he doesn't understand that the term facts themselves are under the same scrutiny. He just grants himself facts.
Which is precisely why such grounding cannot be a God entity.
To give an example,
he gives himself facts. Where's a fact grounded in the world if you just denied moral statements they have no actuality and they're completely subjective to mind, yet your own propositions about truth, about the truth of morality and the rest of the world is also restricted to the same problem, meaning that your statements about morality, about moral realism in this case, are also completely subjective. You don't even know if that's true.
A person who holds to objective morality may uphold murder to always be wrong in every situation.
But you see, there's a problem there. Murder is a legal term that is defined as being the action of committing an unjustifiable homicide. In this context, the act itself is analytically immoral, meaning that it is immoral by definition. But the standards...
Not necessarily, no. That's actually not even true. You could have a legal system that just says you can't do it. It doesn't make an additional claim that it's immoral. When slavery was legal, analytically, definitionally, or moral even, right? Because it was legal. He just equated what's legal with what's moral definitionally, analytically, by definition.
Constitutes justification are entirely subjective to the individual or the society that is evaluating the action. So if it's determined due to any extenuating circumstances that the individual did possess justification, then that individual definitionally did not commit the act of murder, they committed the act of justifiable homicide. So now take this hypothetical into mind.
Hello, what's in question is what's justified now. What's a justified action, not just what's deemed legal.
If you were to commit the act of homicide and you fully did so believing that you had justification to do so, but after a careful analysis of the evidence, the society that you are in determines that you in fact did not have justification, then the ultimate determination would be that you did in fact commit murder, but that ultimate determination would not be in any kind of a mind stance independent sense. And that's because it is the agreed upon internal structure of the society that acts as the external referent that is informing the social stance being appealed to in order to make that determination. So, unless you are able to demonstrate that the act of homicide, sans any context of justification, is itself mind stance independently immoral, then you're always going to be appealing to a stance to justify the moral judgment.
Cool. What's wrong with theocracy then taking over the West, JL? Nothing, right?
Generally, those who uphold objective morality believe in God, and God being that being which gives this system of morality to mankind.
But given that by definition your God is both ultimate and has a mind, then any moral distinctions it makes are entirely subjective to it.
No, dude. That's insane. This is just another category error. As if God, the way it's posited, which is why it's not an internal critique right now, God's very nature would be good. It's not God's opinion about nature determining what's good.
Thus, Sanctus, you are merely grounding such moral distinctions as being objective because you have chosen to define your God as being the ultimate power and authority. But unfortunately for your worldview, that does not logically entail that such distinctions are mind stance independently true. So all you're really doing here is advocating for a might makes right scenario.
No, just might makes, dude. All you have to do is say might makes. You don't have to say right, dummy. You don't have to say might makes right. You can just say might makes, just descriptively. And by the way, even if you said might makes right, even if you took a moral position, all you'd have to do, according to your philosophy, dumbass, is make it legal.
A lack of belief in God's existence generally leads to a lack of belief in objective or universal morality.
There are a handful of atheists out there that do make arguments for moral realism. Unfortunately for them, they're in the same boat as you. They're just not grounding their position in the existence of any kind of an agent, such as a god. And
cool. Ground truth in something that's not a mind or agent, such as a god, beaver boy. Do it. Ground truth, that which comports with reality. Okay. Who gets to determine what comports with reality? I do it. I did it myself.
That's because they recognize the logical contradiction of trying to ground mind-independent statements in
every freeze frame, every single word, every single time it works.
A mind.
Cool. Is that a mind-independent statement about that? That's not true either then.
But then there becomes an issue with the practicality of this belief. For if we grant that subjective morality is true, and objective morality isn't, then many absurd consequences result from this view.
Because in the end, all you're doing is advocating for slavery because you've been
What's wrong with slavery? What's wrong with slavery, bro?
Convinced that your particular God is the all-powerful slave master.
What's wrong with an all-powerful slave master, Warren?
Thus today we shall drive atheism to its logical conclusions regarding morality, purpose, and value.
There's that common issue again. The position of atheism does not logically entail holding to any specific scientific or philosophical positions.
That's wrong. The conclusion that God doesn't exist definitely includes and necessitates an epistemic system, something you assume, a criteria for how you come to knowledge and why you think it's a reasonable conclusion, or even if you were determined to come to the conclusion that God didn't exist, you'd still be appealing to mechanics. You'd be appealing to biology. You'd be appealing to neurology. You'd be appealing to evolution. You'd be appealing to the fact that you think you're a body, that you have a mind. You'd be appealing to language. You'd be appealing to logic, mathematics, reasoning, meaning. The
position of moral anti-realism does hold that an individual cannot state that something is morally wrong in any kind of a mind stance independent sense, but it does hold that a thing can be stated to be wrong in a relativistic or subjective sense, such as in reference to something normative like the structure of a society. The problem here, Sanctus, is that you are front-loading this assertion with the notion that the position of moral anti-realism is itself a logical contradiction. But given that there exists no logical contradiction in moral distinctions being subjective, the only
no, there is a contradiction. A contradiction is what you define as moral is also just defined as something else. So if someone says one thing's moral, another person says another thing's moral, they can't both be moral and both not moral at the same time. Stop using the word moral, dude.
By imposing your own preferences on another person, you attempt to make your preferences of morality the standard that all should follow.
All of this is covered by moral relativism. That you scientists don't like or agree with it is irrelevant. It doesn't make the conclusion false.
Thus, the most vilest of immoral actions become licit and acceptable.
That is a potential consequence, sure. Why do you think our species constantly goes to war with itself over this stuff? There's still no actual issue here.
As was stated, one can't really tell another person that rationally their actions are wrong by appealing to some standard.
Actually, he's doing the actually mean.
Actually, we can. It's called the legal system, and we're not.
Hold on, wait, whoa. Hold on.
There's still no actual issue here.
As was stated, one can't really tell another person that rationally their actions are wrong by appealing to some standard.
Actually, we can. It's called the legal system.
That's a fucking idiot. And he's gonna say, actually, listen to this. This is nuts. Listen.
Actually, we can. It's called the legal system. And we're not stating that the distinctions that we make are mind independently true here. We are stating that they are objectively true only in reference to what is subjectively agreed upon with.
They're objectively true based on what's subjectively agreed upon? You're a sophist. Excuse my language. Just a sophist, dude. You came to objectivity from subjectivity? How did you come to subjectivity as being objectively real? And by the way, what's worse about this, not just the philosophy he's appealing to right now, which is just so insanely bankrupt and idiotic, but it's self-refuting. He's in a self-refuting position right now. He just cooked himself. Second of all, he appealed to, actually, it's called the legal system, okay? Can a legal system be irrational? But listen to what he's saying, dude. Listen to what he's saying.
We're not stating that the distinctions that we make are mind independently true here. We are stating that they are objectively true only in reference to what is subjectively agreed upon with.
They're objectively true. They're objectively true based on what we subjectively agree upon. What? They're objectively true, which means that they're true independent of what we subjectively think. They're objectively true, definitionally true, regardless of our opinions, but based on subjective opinions. They're objectively true.
Interestingly, many atheists opt out for a system of utilitarianism, which attempts to have a society constructed on the idea of maximizing pleasure and getting rid of that which is opposed to pleasure. There are a couple issues with this system. For one, which pleasures that ought to be maximized are not necessarily agreed upon by all people. For what one person prefers or finds pleasure in, another may detest, in which case the majority rules on what is pleasurable.
Thus the existence of the justice systems that are established to secure and maintain the agreed upon standards of the society.
Oh, you are such an idiot, dude. Who determines it is the question from the Catholic, JL.
Really have no basis for opposing slavery.
Firstly, and most obviously, agreed upon social systems do change over time, and the applied justice systems change to reflect that. Secondly, the position of atheism still has nothing to do with any of this. Regardless of whether or not we believe in the existence of a God, if our collectively agreed upon goal is to maximize well-being for individuals in the society, then we ought to conduct ourselves in a manner that maximizes that well-being. Slavery, the act of which demonstrably diminishes the well-being of the individual by
No, that's assuming we ought to appeal to the individual. Maximum well-being is collective. It's actually totally consistent. If there was an aspect of slavery that maximized the well-being of more people than the slaves, then the individuals are in the non-slave category. If there's more benefit to the non-slaves, JL, then the individuals don't matter. If every family was maximized in a city, if they were designated a slave from Africa or Asia, if you wanted a smaller one for electronics, then it would maximize the well-being of the majority over the individual.
Reducing or eliminating civil liberties and bodily autonomy then ought to be outlawed within the society. Ultimately, whether you ground that in a supernatural God concept or
By the way, rights restrict bodily autonomy as well, dude. It punishes action, dude. Look at every freeze frame. Every freeze frame works.
Or if you ground it in our species' evolved naturalistic capacity for empathy is irrelevant. The subjectively determined goal is agreed upon, thus the codes of acceptable behavior are agreed upon by the people.
Good. Slavery is agreed upon, therefore it's moral. If it was agreed upon that slavery was good and moral, so long as it's agreed upon, then we ought to pursue it, right?
Another issue with this worldview is it amounts to saying that the purpose of life is self-pleasure.
While that could be an individual's conclusion, that conclusion is not logically entailed by the position itself. What is logically entailed by the position is that the purpose for any one individual's life is entirely self-determined. Whether that purpose the individual has chosen for themselves is functionally beneficial, neutral...
Again, JL's view doesn't have a person. They have no self-determined. The self, itself is determined. He grants that there's people who can act in the world, and they're saying, oh, I'm self-determined, I have autonomy. No. Under your view, freeze frame, every freeze frame works with this guy. Under your view, JL, there's no such thing as self-determined because the thing you're calling a self is a machine. The thing you're calling a self is an it, not a self. Like a rock isn't self-determined. A waterfall isn't self-determined. There's no autonomy or choice or evaluation or will. Now, why did I start with when someone says they're an atheist and they say, my atheist belief it doesn't bring in any other assumptions about reality. Yes, it does. It starts with a metaphysical claim that you are a person with a mind who can come to conclusions about the world. That's preceding. That precedes the view of atheism.
But atheism not only rejects universal morality, but it rejects universal purpose.
Purpose and truth. Also truth. Not just purpose. Truth.
Still not a logical defeater. If all the people within the society agree that individuals can determine the purpose for their own lives themselves, while simultaneously agreeing upon a collective purpose for the society itself, and that individual purposes should not countermand the collective goal, then your point becomes moot unless you yourself can demonstrate the existence of a source for mind-stance independent moral statements.
He's in a contradiction. He's assuming in challenging the guy to produce or prove or demonstrate a universal moral purpose. He's in a performative contradiction because in his counter, he's assuming universality of coming to justified belief or argumentation or coherent position, right? Why, JL? Why would he do that if there's no purpose to doing that or he doesn't have to do that? JL, why would the guy you're countering have to demonstrate anything to you? Oh, I'm sorry. Are you assuming some sort of purpose or direction toward truth? Why should we go there? Who's got the superior position on purpose? Well, he's saying there is none. But that would also say that there's no purpose in evaluating this. That's the meta, right? The meta always kills these people. They're in this funny game they play with themselves on their channels where they take a position that there's ultimately no purpose to having a channel and debating things. There's no purpose or direction toward truth. It's all just agreeing, right? It's all agreeing to something to pass the time. And then they're like, well, you're going to have to demonstrate to me that there's purpose. Why? Why would I do that? What's the purpose of that?